Dear friends, I'm Janet Parker, Interim Senior Minister at First Congregational United Church of Christ in Portland, and I'm recording this Holy Saturday reflection for you on April 11th, 2020, from my living room. And it's very likely that you will listen to it in your living room or your kitchen or your bedroom or some other place in your own home. Tomorrow, many of us will gather together online at 10:30 a.m. for a Facebook Live pre-recorded worship service, an Easter celebration service that's being prepared by churches in our Central Pacific Conference. And it will also be available to you on our website. And you will also watch that from your own home, because this is a Holy Week unlike any other that we've experienced. The doors of the churches across our country, at least the vast majority of them, are sealed this Holy Week, and they will be sealed tomorrow, as sealed as the tomb of Jesus was sealed and made secure. They've been sealed by the pandemic that is sweeping our globe and has forced governments around the world to issue stay-at-home orders. And so those of us who are privileged to be able to stay in our homes, who have homes, who are able to work from home, or who have already retired and are able to stay home, we are mostly doing just that, hunkering down. Except for going out for groceries or other essentials or the occasional walk or jog or bike ride, we are confined to our homes. And we are doing the socially responsible thing by staying in our homes and preventing the spread of this terrible virus any more than it already is. But others are not so privileged. Others in our own congregation, in our community, are going out to work in essential jobs we've come to call frontline work, not just as doctors and nurses, as hospital chaplains, as firefighters and police and EMT, the jobs we perhaps more typically think of as frontline jobs, but also as grocery store checkout clerks, Instacart shoppers, Amazon employees, bus drivers, farm workers, factory workers, and social workers. And those who are volunteering, who are going out of their homes to volunteer, to provide food and shelter and essentials for those among us who are houseless or simply in need of extra services that they have to go out to get. And so during this Holy Week, in a way that we haven't seen for some time, cracks that have long been present in our society are becoming more visible, more unavoidably apparent, as they always do in times of disaster. Fracture lines that have been created and have endured for generations, created by social and economic and racial inequality, have made some communities and groups more vulnerable to a virus that preys on those with underlying health conditions, with those who are poor or have no access to health care, and those who work in blue-collar or gig economy jobs. And of course, the virus is preying on our elderly, who also, on balance, struggle more with poverty and lack of social supports than the general population does. Well, in the midst of this reality, we come to Holy Saturday, the day when Jesus lay in the tomb. If Good Friday, the day of Jesus' crucifixion, was a day of cataclysm, of loud noises, of cries from the cross, not only the cross of Jesus, but the crosses of those crucified with him, who we hear about in some of the Gospels, the cries of those standing below the cross, especially on the moment of his death. If Good Friday is a loud day, a cataclysmic day, Holy Saturday is a day we often just pass over on our way to Easter. It's a day of eerie stillness, of silence or quiet weeping. It's the aftermath of death. Well, for me, this is a Holy Saturday like no other. As I speak to you, the pandemic is continuing to take its toll. In fact, I heard on the news last night that they think, and one might say, oddly enough, hope, that yesterday was the day of peak deaths of this pandemic, that we will now begin to come down as we continue to flatten the curve, and that we won't have as many deaths on any one day. But how incredibly poignant and ironic that the peak day of deaths in our country from COVID-19 would be on Good Friday. And for those of us who live in Oregon, who have been a little bit more insulated from this pandemic than many other states, the pandemic is really starting to come home, which puts the events of this Holy Week, and especially Good Friday and Holy Saturday, days when we face dying and death head on in our sacred stories, our sacred tradition, it puts it in a different light. As I speak to you today, we have a member of our church whose daughter is dying at this very moment, who is being sustained in life on a ventilator, but for whom the chance of recovery is now vanishingly small. I am holding that daughter who I've never met and that church member whom I know, of course, well. I'm holding them in my prayers on this day. We have a church member whose sister is marooned in a third world country, unable to reach life-sustaining medication or to get a flight back to the U.S. I am keeping that sister and that church member whom I know well in my prayers today. I know many of you are also praying for these individuals and families. We also learned just this week that an aunt of the wife of one of our members has passed away because of COVID-19 in California, and we keep that family in our prayers. And so we pause today to remember the toll that this pandemic is taking. On this day when we remember the body of Jesus lying in a tomb, we remember the bodies of those lost globally. Now, I believe over 100,000 to this pandemic. And we hold in our hearts those who are suffering at this moment, who are ill, who cannot receive tests or health care, who are afraid to go to the hospital for fear of getting worse or getting the virus if they don't have it. We hold all these people in our prayers, and we hold in our prayers those, including those in our own congregation, who work in these frontline jobs, these essential jobs that are still going out to their jobs, that are still exposing themselves and their families to this virus, who don't have the privilege of just hunkering down at home. Friends, this is a real crisis. It is not a crisis that's been manufactured by the media or a political party, much as some may wish for that to be the case. This is a crisis that will define us going forward. It will be one of those fault lines that people look back at. historically and remember. Remember the before and the after, like Pearl Harbor Day or 9/11, the beginning of World War I. And how we respond to this pandemic, it will define us as individuals, as a church, as a nation, and even as a world community. And so as we sit, perhaps more than usual, in a contemplative stillness, a forced stillness perhaps, on this Holy Saturday, as we think of the mass grave that is being dug at this moment in New York City for bodies of people who are unclaimed, who have been lost to this pandemic. As we remember those dying even now, what resources does our faith have to offer us? What light can our sacred stories of this holiest of weeks shed on who we are called to be, and how we might respond in more constructive ways for a better world to come on the other side of this pandemic? There is one passage in particular that I wanted to lift up to you as having special relevance, at least for me at this time, that has come to be very meaningful to me. And it actually is a Good Friday text. It is in the Gospel of John, and it is while Jesus is on the cross. And he is looking down from the cross, and he sees the two most beloved people in his life, his mother and the one they call the beloved disciple. We don't know the identity of that disciple. Some think it's John, but we really don't know. And he looks down from the cross and he sees them. And John chapter 19, verses 26 and 27 says, "When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing beside her, he said to his mother, 'Woman, here is your son.' And he said to the disciple, 'Here is your mother.' And from that hour, the disciple took her into his own home." Well, as I was preparing for this reflection and studying this narrative of Jesus' death, I learned something that I had not heard before, which is that the Greek for "take her into his home" is actually eis ta idia. Eis ta idia, to take her in among his own. To take her into his own. It doesn't use the word home. That is something that we have inferred that Jesus meant. But actually, it could also mean simply John took her into his own family, took her into his people, to his most intimate community, his family. And that the mother of Jesus, who is losing her son, is being given a son, is being given a new family. And so there's this beautiful connection that is being woven here by Jesus from the cross as he looks upon his beloveds and gives them into one another's care. Gives them into one another's care. Yes, they knew each other, but they weren't in this kind of relationship with each other. It brings forth something new. It creates family and community in a way that was not there before. And as I thought about that, I thought about all of the people who are unable to receive visitors in our hospitals and in nursing homes and assisted living facilities, where many of us have family members, including my own mother, who's in a skilled nursing facility in Texas, including the daughter of our church member who is dying in a hospital, who is unable to be reached by her father, her siblings, her family and loved ones. And I think about the people that are becoming family, drawn out of this crisis, weaving relationships that don't normally exist in these scenarios, in which doctors and nurses and CNAs and all kinds of healthcare workers and hospital chaplains, of course, are stepping in to be family when family cannot be present. And that brings me incredible comfort as I think about my own mom. When I was in Houston at the beginning of March, just a little over a month ago, and I visited her in this nursing home, where we're hoping she's only temporarily going to have to be, but she is still there. And when I visited her there, I wasn't that thrilled with this place, to be honest. I wasn't all that thrilled with the attention she was getting, with some lack of responsiveness by the staff, by the nursing staff. I could tell that the administrator was trying to do her best, but it was just challenging, and I was nervous about leaving her there. But I took comfort in the fact that I have a cousin who lives in the area who is really my mom's on-site family and a family caregiver when I'm not able to be there. And then came the lockdown, when the facility closed its doors to visitors, and my cousin Shannon couldn't even get in. And even if I got on a plane, I could not get in to see her. And she's not dying. She's well. I mean, she's struggling with some serious health issues, but she's not dying, and she doesn't have the coronavirus, thank God. But she's alone in there, in the sense of not being reachable by her family and friends. And yet, here's the miracle. She's not alone. She's not alone because that staff has stepped up. I can tell by listening to my mom talk about the care she is receiving. There was one CNA in particular that we weren't very happy with, who would come in and just turn off the call button and say, "I'll be right back," but then she would go off and get busy, and sometimes it felt like even forget about my mom and what she needed. And we got frustrated enough that we asked the nursing administrator if she could just maybe reassign that person somewhere else. And but that person has continued to provide nursing care for my mom. And what's really amazing is my mom said to me yesterday, "You know, she and I have become friends." And I'm like, "You've become friends?" And she says, "Yeah." She said, "We worked it out, and she's really good to me, and we're friends now." And I think also about the wound care nurse, Jessie, that has become my mom's friend, and another CNA named Reese, and even the head of the facility, Rolando, who has helped her with some needs to connect with the outside world and get some things done that couldn't have been done without his help. And I can tell that she feels safe there, and that somehow she's not lonely, at least not in the way that I feared. And I think about the volunteers these days that are going out and risking their own health and maybe that of their families as well by serving our houseless community in Portland, or of the PPOP volunteers, Portland People's Outreach Project, which still come into our church and put together the kits of the life-saving essential supplies that they take out to camps where people who are suffering and struggling with drug addiction stay, and make sure they have clean needles and other things that they need to try to prevent illness and sustain life. And I think about our business manager, Kara, who is going to the church office when it is safe to do so, when no one else is there, and is printing out flyers for the PPOP volunteers to distribute at these camps about how to stay safe and how to prevent infection from COVID-19. And I see the way our society and our communities and some individuals among us are really stepping up, and in which our better angels are coming out, in which we are finding ways to give sacrificially to one another. And I'm so grateful for that. And I think that in that caring and in that compassion, in the recognition that the people that we have so often simply overlooked or ignored or taken for granted are lower income service workers, people who are blue collar or in the gig economy for whom we have not provided benefits like paid sick leave, or even health insurance like every other developed nation has, that these are the heroes right now, just by going about their lives. And yet, they are also disproportionately becoming the victims. And that is a message to us as well. That is a Good Friday, Holy Saturday message to us as well. Where are the sufferings of Jesus being manifested right now in the more marginalized and the more vulnerable in our society? And what do we need to do to see that going forth from this pandemic, that things change, that things are different? When we came out of World War II and out of the Great Depression, we had new programs, a new social safety net, things that enabled the rise of the middle class as we know it today. We had measures relating to racial integration that came out of soldiers of different races serving side by side in World War II. How might there be the seeds for resurrection right now being planted in our midst? And will we water them? Will we water the seeds? At the end of the story of Jesus' death, there is a short passage about the burial of Jesus. And it's interesting that in John, and only in John, Jesus' crucifixion takes place in a garden, and he's also buried in a tomb in a garden. And the garden looks back to that first garden, the Garden of Eden. It looks forward to the new heavens and the new earth, the new Jerusalem, where the river of the water of life runs through, and the leaves of the trees on either side are for the healing of the nations. It looks forward to that garden, the new heaven and the new earth. Could it be that we have an opportunity to move forward as we celebrate Easter Sunday tomorrow, not just to celebrate the resurrection of Jesus, as important and world-changing as that was, but to also celebrate the rising of Christ now in our midst, through our own hearts, pouring out in love to lift up those among us who are most at risk, to bind up the wounds, to finally tackle the racial and socioeconomic inequalities that keep us separate? Can we use this as an opportunity to really see one another, whether we're strangers or acquaintances or friends or even enemies, to see one another as kin, to take one another into our own, in among our own, to be family. I pray that you will have an especially meaningful and blessed Easter this year, and that even if and as you wrestle with the specter of suffering and death from this pandemic in ways that are still unfolding and are yet to be made known, that you will always hold in your hearts the powerful truth of Easter. Death does not have the last word. Christ lives. Love wins. God's power is more powerful than anything the world can do. Let us take heart. For as Jesus says at the end of Matthew, the risen Jesus, to his disciples, "For lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age."